Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness. Adapted from the novelization by J.R. Millward, based on an original story by A. Murty Schofield. With J.R. Millward and Adam Coover. With music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Episode 9.
There was something I had to get to. Something I had to reach, no matter what. It spun before me like a firefly, bobbing just beyond my snatching fingers. I cried as it began to fade, either getting further away or dying altogether.
You okay?
Oh, Bashard. What are you doing here?
No time now. Quickly!
His worried tone sobered me back to consciousness more effectively than 10 raw eggs and a pint of espresso. The crossbow had been digging in my back. Ow. I glanced around, and a knot of anxiety tightened in my belly. The stranger was gone. A slice of reflected light caught my eye where he'd been lying, and on reflex I picked it up. Something smooth and crystal cool. Hurriedly, I tucked it into my backpack and darted to the crime lord's side before Bouchard noticed. He gestured to a sombre-looking Mercedes, where a pink-faced young driver stood getting steadily wetter in the now pouring rain. Was anyone around when you got here?
No one. Come on. We have to get off the street.
Bouchard, I must get back to Von Croy's apartment. There's something I have to check out there.
Your friend's place, of course. Where is it?
Rue Valise, the Chantel building. Do you know it?
My driver will. Get in.
Something about his manner struck an off note, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Besides, the rain was worsening and I could hear sirens in the distance. I thrust my doubts aside and squared my shoulders, determined not to show my unease. The car smelt of expensive upholstery and Cuban cigars. It was a relief to be in the dry as I leaned on the windowsill and gazed at the rain-lashed streets gliding past. I was suddenly aware of my still damp clothes. It felt like weeks since I'd last been properly clean. Bouchard perched next to me on the back seat. He kept fidgeting with his hands, resting them on his knee, tapping them on the sill, stroking his chin. What were you doing at the Louvre?
Calling police shortwave. You are attracting a lot of attention in there. I figured you might need some help.
Thanks. He doesn't strike me as the generous sort. And he didn't answer the question. Why was he out here in the first place? Unaware of my inner monologue, Bouchard slid his hand across my knee. The gesture, more possessive than protective, made my hackles rise.
Wouldn't you prefer somewhere safer than your friend's apartment?
Unsmiling, I replaced his hand tactfully on the seat. I found some leads in the Louvre that may link to his death. I have to at least check his apartment, Bouchard.
Don't fuss. We're almost there.
Indeed, the car was slowing, idling along familiar streets. The bulk of the Chantel building emerged from the pouring darkness ahead, making my heart throb with foreboding. I could hardly believe how much had happened in so little time.
There is something you should know. The police barns were full of details of another monstrum killing in Prague.
Prague? Not a dealer named Vasily? Matthias Vasily?
Yes, you know him?
He's connected with something I have to find at Von Croy's apartment. I need to go in alone.
All right, I'll wait here. You be careful now.
Appreciate it, Bouchard. It was my turn to smile, despite my weariness. He flicked me a carefree salute as I turned my steps towards the entrance. I glanced back, spotting Bouchard already chatting away on his mobile. Probably ordering in tonight's pizza. I hoped he saved me a slice or 17. I was famished. Pushing my hunger aside, I prowled up the stairs to Werner's floor. His door was covered by a web of crime scene tape. Making doubly sure I was unobserved, I snapped the flimsy barrier and slipped inside. The door had been left unlocked. Beams of light parted the shadows like gentle hands pulling away the blanket of a sleeping invalid. Cautious, tentative, and unsure as to what lay underneath. No time for sorrow or regrets, Lara. We're here to observe and to find those engravings. There'll be time to mourn him later. With my inner self supporting me, I forced myself to take notice of every last detail without emotional involvement. This was a crime scene, and I had to think like a detective if any of it was going to make sense. With a deep breath, I stalked past Werner's peace lily, badly in need of watering, and entered the living room. A muddy stain spread out from a knocked-over coffee pot. Matching crockery lay amid the ruins of the low table. Armchairs lay like dazed sumo wrestlers, their legs pointing at nothing. Books from a handsome mahogany case littered the floor. Fingerprints of the gods, Akhenaten, false prophet, principles of Egyptian art. The remains of a jade-coloured Denby vase stood out like shards of bone amongst the books, and the baleful eyes of Werner's walking cane stared back at me from where it lay abandoned by the fireplace. I suppressed a shudder, even though I knew the inlaid jackal's head was only a reproduction. Perhaps my earlier judgment of Werner had been right after all. It didn't seem right to carry a constant reminder of a creature that had enslaved your mind and tried to destroy the world, just because you had recurrent gout. I walked towards the window, taking everything in with as much dispassion as I could muster. Diaphanous curtains wafted slightly in the breeze from the shattered pane. I hadn't remembered it breaking. A flash of lightning threw ghoulish shadows across the blood-stained wall. Despite my early resolve, emotion tangled in my belly as I beheld the symbols, as incomprehensible now as they had been 2 days ago. I stepped closer and was stopped by a warning tinkle of glass. Bending, I lifted the broken frame with care, tenderly brushing away the shattered fragments. Thunder rumbled as I beheld the photograph, and I blinked in surprise. Professor Von Croy dominated the shot, brimming with the pride and experience of a man in his prime. I remembered his travelling clothes, tailored on Savile Row, and the cream fedora partially shading his face. His hand rested on the shoulders of a teenage girl. Her expression blended modesty with mischief, and a genuine excitement from being in the Cambodian jungle. Her brunette hair was restrained by 2 playful pigtails, and she couldn't have been more than 16 years old. I had no idea Werner had kept this after all these years. The irony of the photograph was powerful. A memento of our first shared adventure, in the very place my mentor had met his death. But what exactly had Werner died for? Only by finding and understanding that would I come close to avenging his murder. With great care, I set the photograph down on the sideboard and leaned on it while I gathered my thoughts. My reflection in the gilt vermeil mirror gazed back in challenge. Help me out here, Maggie. I know the answers. Think, girl. It was stormy the night of his murder. Listen to the thunder. Remember his voice, the sound of his words.
Need you to get something for me.
Smell the meal he'd prepared that afternoon.
5 obscure paintings for a client called Eckhart.
Something with fish and onions.
He's a psychopath.
Powerful scents that carry memories of that night.
Get out!
Remember!
Get out of the way!
I sucked in my stomach, remembering the jab of a gun. But my eyes had snapped open. Yes! Footsteps. Soft, but deliberate. An arm on my shoulder, impossibly strong, sweeping me aside. I staggered back, shock coursing through me. Dazed, I bumped against the far bookshelf, and my shoulder blades winced in remembered pain. The books at my feet, I'd knocked them off the shelves. Werner had cried out, in terror, not pain. My gaze travelled to the place where I'd found him, where his blood was still a glutinous black puddle on the Persian rug. He'd dropped the gun. I'd heard it thump on the rug and skitter away. I rushed over to the dining table, emerging a moment later with an antique handgun, a Rig 09 or early Luger model. It was exactly the kind of curio a distinguished Austrian professor might keep as a family souvenir from the war, or the kind of substandard rubbish a harassed Parisian crime boss would fob off to a frightened old man. The magazine held room for 8 rounds. There were 7 bullets left. There had been a shadow across me, doubled and misshapen. The sound of a last gargled exhalation and the heavy thud of a body dropping to the ground. Werner, strangled to death. My eyes rolled upwards, beholding the panelled ceiling. A figure had stepped over me, fleeting as a phantom, one clumsily wrapped hand dripping hot liquids. Awkwardly, I tried to triangulate my position. The shadowy figure had left by the front door, so he must have passed me by, leaving me unharmed. But why? And who? My eyes squeezed shut as I ransacked through the fog of dreams and after-images. There had to be something, some clue as to who it was. The realization, when it came, nearly poleaxed me. A man brushing me aside in the entrance to Wren's pawn shop. Grey suit, grey hair, an aura like a death shroud, with eyes like muted fire behind smoked glasses. He'd been here the night Werner died. He'd killed my friend while I lay senseless. All unknowingly, I'd bumped shoulders with the monstrum. I was suddenly shaking, violently and uncontrollably. The doubt I had carried, the question of whether I had actually been the one to end Werner's life, was suddenly drowning in heart-wrenching guilt. I should have trusted my instincts and paid more attention to the stranger in the pawn shop. The murderer couldn't have gotten far. I would have caught him if I hadn't been so preoccupied with collecting Werner's equipment. It was all I could do not to fall over. Dizziness and shame roared like a black tide through my thoughts, blinding me to the room and the ever-present stench of blood. When you've quite finished beating yourself up, Lara, you might want to have a look around for those engravings we came for. But the monstrum was here, so you know what he looks like. You're not about to let yourself spiral into self-pity over a wasted opportunity. We didn't know then what we've learned now. The sooner we find those engravings, the sooner we can track down Werner's killer. A warmth seemed to infuse my limbs, like sunrise in the desert. Other memories returned to me, memories of dear friends, and my soul's cleansing. My subconscious's words, austere though they were, lent me the objectivity I so desperately needed. Again, lightning cast its anti-shadow into the room, followed by bone-rumbling thunder. The storm was gaining in strength, its fury whipping the skies into turmoil. The curtains snapped aside, and I suddenly felt the full force of the wind buffet my face, piercing my damp clothing like an icy shock to the heart. It was like a dream of being beneath a raging waterfall and discovering that, instead of being swept away, you could stand and welcome all that awesome power as your own. I drank great lungfuls of the wind's freshness and gasped, feeling new resolve enter with every breath of expelled doubt. Willingly, I embraced the memories invoked by the storm and felt them unfold from within my subconscious like a flower opening its petals to the sun. For a fleeting moment, I was an elemental being, undaunted by petty gangs and cryptic clues. My feelings of guilt, fear, and anger, however strong, however justified, no longer held any sway over my determination. Werner, Carvier, even Wren, and all the other faceless victims of the monstrum. I would avenge them all. The sound of pattering rain increased, drawing me gently back into my body. The wind relaxed, and the curtains seemed to whisper a farewell as they settled back into place. The moment had passed. You were right, Maggie. There's more in me than I thought. Pluet en vous, the Gordonstons' motto. About time you figured that out, wouldn't you say? I'm glad you're taking Patai's lessons to heart. Now, where were we? Checking Werner's apartment for information, I realised I was shivering. My feelings of invigoration were sinking into the depths of my mind, where they could no longer let me ignore my bodily needs. My purpose for coming here returned with a rush, and I began to search in earnest. Those engravings had to be around here, somewhere. The kitchenette held little except a lingering reek of fish. A partially filleted sea bass lay on the cutting board, next to a stew pot filled with wilting onions and leeks. There was a magazine on professional horse racing on the countertop. I'd never have placed Werner as a gambler. With a slight pang, I realised I'd never really known much of Werner's hobbies outside of archaeology. A quick scout upstairs revealed a handsome, if bland, bedroom, and a shower room decorated in classic bachelor style. Socks and shirts fought to escape the laundry basket, and the bin in the corner was overflowing with used tissues, most of them speckled with blood. I frowned. Werner had always been meticulously clean-shaven. Evidently his nervousness at the monstrum had made even shaving a dangerous chore. A quick search of the drawers uncovered a basic first aid kit, which I pocketed with the gratitude of long experience. I doubted Werner would have begrudged me using his supplies. All in all, the apartment was a tidy little retreat for the middle of Paris, though still a far cry from Werner's family estate in Vienna. His office area, crammed with bookshelves and files, turned up far more informative prizes. Bingo! Look, here, the Lux Veritatis. Werner says they were a 12th century offshoot of the Knights Templar, dedicated to suppressing works of sorcery and alchemy. Apparently they were also responsible for destroying the black alchemist Peter van Eckhart in 1445. That would tally with the diary entries of that fanatic who tried to find the painting before us. There's information on the Sandglyph here too, but damn, there's nothing here we don't already know. Except it was an artifact of great alchemic power. But what in the blazes does it do? It's something to do with the Nephilim. I can feel it. I'm sure Father Patrick would be able to offer us some pointers. But look here. The Cabal. A powerful alliance of 5 alchemists and sorcerers in the 13 and 1400s. Eckhart is said to have betrayed and murdered almost all of them to control their secrets. Now that is interesting. Power-hungry megalomaniacs don't play well with others, as a rule. He must have needed their expertise. Eckhart was working on something. Something he didn't want to share. Could it have been the Sandglyph? Perhaps. Werner also mentions that the Cabal and the Lux Veritatis battled constantly, even after Eckhart's disappearance in 1445. If our mouldy friend under the Louvre is anything to go by, Eckhart must have gathered a pretty rabid set of followers to support him for this great work. Maggie, what if the Eckhart Werner was working for is the same person as this black alchemist? Well, he'd have to be over 500 years old by now. So, not impossible. We've banged into a couple of immortals before. It just seems too much of a coincidence that the name and the purpose are the same now as they were then. The first Eckhart created the Sandglyph and hid them in the paintings. Now this Eckhart is searching for the paintings, and Werner von Croy, was living in mortal terror of him. I can't see Werner being intimidated by just another everyday client, can you? True, but even if we assume that the 15th century Eckhart and Werner's client are the same person, it still doesn't tell us what the Sandglyph's purpose is meant to be. In frustration, my gaze travelled back along the desk. My eyes narrowed at the sight of Werner's fax machine. and the enigma of the Sanglyph was nudged aside by a more pressing concern. Where would Werner have hidden something as important and as dangerous as the engravings? In the best hiding place of all, naturally. Plain sight. Something hidden, go and find it. And to find something, all you need is a map. Excitedly, I reached for the large painting hanging on the office wall, a print of the old Silk Road, Persian, circa 1590. It was delicate and not a little heavy, but as I lifted it down from its pegs, something slipped out from behind the frame. A plain brown envelope. Crouching, I held it open and the contents fell into my hand. 4 A4-sized sepia-coloured sketches. At first and even second glance, looking like the mad offspring between Da Vinci and M.C. Escher at his most macabre. I'd found the engravings. I didn't get the chance to have a third glance. I ducked without thinking, narrowly avoiding the firestorm of bullets that shredded the computer monitor like it was made of paper. The shadow that had flickered in the corner of my eye had already vanished. I swore, diving for cover, but there was precious little shelter to be found. More bullets hounded my ass as I flung myself behind a brick pillar. I stuffed the engravings into my trouser pocket, not caring about creases, and assessed my surroundings. The gunman had ducked behind the kitchen counter, a perfect position to keep the whole room in view. His weapon was high caliber, but using a silencer. It coughed rather than roared. My would-be assassin was a professional. Apart from a few tranquilizer darts, all I had was Werner's antique Luger with 7 bullets. Oh, and a 500-year-old crossbow that probably belonged in a museum. Huzzah! The shooter had paused, probably to reload. I cast my gaze up, past the Cambodian photograph. Using the mirror, I sighted on a dark shape and squeezed off a couple of rounds over my shoulder. To my surprise and delight, the little gun actually worked. One bullet went wide, shattering the mug stand, but the other caught the gunman somewhere tender and he let out an involuntary grunt, stumbling into full view. Instantly, I advanced, darting from cover to the shelter of an upturned chair and planted a couple more rounds in his direction. Both shots landed squarely in his chest. I hissed in triumph, but the man must have been wearing reinforced Kevlar. He staggered, but kept his footing. A burst of retaliatory fire chewed into my chair. Coin-sized holes appeared in the upholstery, only inches from my face, and my nose was suddenly filled with a reek of cordite. I played dead for all I was worth. At last I heard the gun click empty, and the rattle as it was tossed disdainfully away, like a tourist chucking a disposable camera. I readied for another attack, but instead was nearly knocked to the ground as the man blew past me, heading for the door. He wasn't waiting to be picked off. I made a grab at his ankle, but missed. Cursing, I dashed after him, out into the hallway, and met a nasty surprise. A blinking light in the periphery of my vision was my only warning. With an indrawn gasp, I threw my forward momentum into a belly flop. My eyes widened as I beheld a near invisible line of scarlet laser light scarcely a foot above my head. My gaze slid to the side, where a digital timer was strapped expertly to pencil-sized cartridges of TNT and wedged into a lump of C4. Had I been running at full tilt, even dental records wouldn't have been enough to identify me. The gunman was nowhere in sight, but I took no chances. I splayed my body across the carpet, pressing right into the crackling woolen pile, and crawled under the treacherous beam. My shock gave way to anger. Such indiscriminate ordnance could destroy half the building. There were other people, ordinary residents, in here besides myself. The gunman didn't have to involve them. I really, really hoped that my business was concluded before they called the police. Cautiously, I peered around the corner. It was only a single corridor to the exit stairwell, with recessed doorways spaced evenly along its length. There! A hunched figure over by the stairs. The muzzle of a rifle snuck its deadly nose out into the corridor, breaking up the man's silhouette. Even worse, I could spy at least 2 more lumps of explosives along the walls, linked by a knee-high red beam. I drew back, pondering my next move. There were only 3 bullets left in my gun. An idea formed. If this works, I'll get Winston to build a temple to Horus in the garden. I took aim. The light fixture above the gunman exploded with a pop of fractured glass. In an instant, I was running, not letting him recover from the microsecond's distraction. Sometimes a microsecond is all that's needed. The man was already turning when my crossbow sighed through the air and struck him full in the chest. I followed in its wake, leaping over the laser trap and emptying my last 2 bullets where they mattered most. The underside of his chin. The back wall exploded in scarlet and he stared at me through skewed sunglasses, incredulous. Then he was falling, tumbling in a limp tangle down the stairs. His neck broke somewhere along the way, and he landed in a boneless pile. The crossbow bounced after him and shattered on the hard tiles of the lobby. Never underestimate the tactical power of a lump of wood. Coldly, I descended the stairs, not letting myself breathe until I had convinced myself he really was dead. His neck was bent at an impossible angle, and the tiled floor was sticky with a growing red puddle. He was absolutely still. Despite the inescapable revulsion of taking a life, I felt relief sluice through me, deeper than I'd realized was possible. There didn't seem to be any clues to his identity. The red bandana covering his shaved head was stained a deeper scarlet where it touched his wound. His trousers, sweater and weapon rigs were all black, as were his fetish of a moustache and goatee. Well, just my luck. Slyly, I eased his mobile phone from its holster and flipped it open. The reception was terrible, but an unmistakable voice growled through the static.
Is she taken care of yet? Hello? Is she dead yet? We have to get back to Prague.
No, Bouchard, she isn't. But your little friend is. I'll take care of you later. I hung up, tossing the phone away. It gave me a fleeting glow of satisfaction to imagine the look on his face, but personal sniping wouldn't give me the answers I sought. I looked down at the body, fighting disgust. Bouchard was just a cat's paw, a convenient bit of local muscle for my true adversary to bribe and threaten into taking me out of the way. Whoever he worked for must have decided I wasn't needed anymore. Bouchard's distracted manner and his elusive answers suddenly made a lot more sense. After only a brief rummage, I found what I was looking for. I drew the detonator control from the dead man's sleeve and disabled the explosives. Just then, the backwash of adrenaline decided to stake its claim for services rendered. Fatigue plucked at my muscles and blurred my vision. I remembered how damned hungry I was. Just the thought of sinking into a hot bath and sleeping for a month was painful in its attraction. The least I could do would be to find a safe haven for a few hours, somewhere I could catch a little sleep, and maybe grab something to eat that wasn't processed in a factory 6 months ago. Despite my practicality, I knew that however much I tended to my physical needs, I would only find true rest, true relief, when either Werner's killer lay dead at my feet, or I lay in my own grave. With such life-affirming thoughts for company, I set about systematically looting the body of everything I could carry. His weapons were of the highest quality, a Colt Viper SMG, cleaned and oiled and with plenty of spare ammo, and a pair of rather delicious Scorpion X pistols. I even found keys for a 4-wheel drive, a bonus that simplified my travel arrangements immeasurably. The thought of trying to hitchhike my way across Europe was not that appealing, especially when one considered the conspicuousness of my new arsenal. I wasn't in the mood to involve more innocent people than I already had. As if affirming my decision, I found a business card in his back pocket. The name Vasily leapt out at me in curling, artsy script, and there was even a phone number and address printed on the back. A charged thrill raced up and down my spine at the sight of a symbol beside his name. The same arrow-like emblem of the Lux Veritatis that I'd seen sewn on the surcoats of Brother Obscure's undead knights. I had 4 of the engravings in one hand, and the key to finding the last of them clutched in the other. I breathed out slowly, letting a little hope override my weariness. Well then, I guess it's time I visited Prague. Oh, goody. Can I come too? When do you not? Ah, now we're getting metaphysical.
In episode 9 of Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness, Lara Croft was played by J.R. Millward. Louis Bouchard and Professor Werner von Croy were played by Adam Coover. Written and adapted by J.R. Millward. Based on an original story by A. Murty Schofield. With music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Additional sound effects courtesy of www.presfx.co.uk, the BBC, and the YouTube Audio Library. Produced by Stephen Millward. Lara Croft and Tomb Raider are the property of Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix.